Imagine an emperor so obsessed with his dead wife that he tried to bring her back by surgically remaking a living boy into a double. This isn't fiction. It happened 2,000 years ago. Picture Rome in the summer heat of 67 AD. The city's a roar of voices and clanging metal. Spices and smoke thick in the air. Merchants shout prices for figs and olives, while chariot wheels grind against the stone streets. Suddenly, a hush falls like a dropped curtain. Heads turn, and through the crowd comes Nero himself, the emperor who commands 30 legions and believes the world exists to stage his fantasies. Draped in crimson, he strides through the forum with a breathtaking young woman whose emerald jewelry flashes like captured lightning. To the casual eye, she is the image of elegance. But Romans are gossip experts, and everyone knows the secret that makes blood run cold. That woman was once a teenage boy named Sporus. Before we dive deeper, hit the like button and subscribe if you love these untold histories. Stories like this aren't just about the past. They warn us about what can happen when one person's obsession becomes law. Now, how did a boy from the imperial household end up wearing the jewels of an empress? To answer, we rewind to Nero at 16. Back then, people believed a golden age had begun. He lowered taxes, staged games for the masses, and played music for crowds that adored him. But absolute power works like a slow-acting drug. The more Nero tasted it, the less he could hear anyone else. Enter Poppaea, Sabina, the woman who became both his greatest passion and his undoing. Poppaea wasn't just admired. She was magnetic, clever, dazzling, ambitious. Their affair scandalized Rome and destroyed Nero's first marriage. He married her in a wedding so lavish that even seasoned senators were left speechless. But love built on obsession burns hot and dangerous. Behind closed doors, their arguments turned volcanic. In 65 AD, during a violent quarrel, Nero struck his pregnant wife with fatal force. Ancient writers disagree on the details, but all agree on the ending. Poppaea died carrying their child. That moment shattered what remained of Nero's sanity. Instead of funeral rites, he ordered her body embalmed in mountains of spice and displayed in a crystal coffin so he could speak to her as if she still breathed. He dined beside her corpse and filled palaces with portraits, convinced that memory alone could bend reality. Soon he began to see her face. Everywhere, in servant girls pouring wine, in strangers crossing the marketplace. Then came the day that sealed Sporus's fate. A young palace freedman, barely 15, entered for a routine audience. His name was Sporus. He had wide, luminous eyes and delicate features, uncannily like Poppaea's. For Nero, it was as if the gods had offered a second chance. Witnesses said the emperor froze mid-sentence, then circled the boy like a predator. "What is your name?" he asked softly. "Sporus, Caesar." In that instant, the boy's old life ended. Nero ordered his physicians to transform Sporus into the living image of his dead wife. The crude surgery, performed with iron instruments, a little more than poppy wine for pain, lasted for agonizing hours. Yet the physical ordeal was only the first step. Nero oversaw months of relentless conditioning, teaching Sporus to walk with small, swaying steps, to speak in a higher register, to smile with Poppaea's very tilt of the head. Servants addressed him only as lady or mistress. Each morning he awoke to a mirror that reflected less of the boy he had been, and more of the phantom Nero demanded. Months of relentless training turned Sporus into the perfect echo of a woman he had never met. He learned how to glide through a room so every fold of silk followed like a tide. How to pour wine without a single tremor. How to laugh at the precise pitch Poppaea once used. Tutors rehearsed him as if he were a star actor preparing for an opening night. And the opening night was coming. Nero planned a wedding grander than any Rome had seen, a spectacle meant to convince the world, and maybe himself, that the dead empress had returned. When the day arrived, Rome buzzed with disbelief. Senators and generals, merchants and poets, everyone who mattered, received invitations they could not refuse. The great hall of the Palatine Palace blazed with thousands of oil lamps. Imported roses perfumed the air so heavily it was hard to breathe. Sporus appeared in a saffron bridal veil, draped in emeralds and pearls that had once belonged to Poppaea herself. As he walked slowly toward the emperor, the crowd fell silent. Some watched with fascination, others with hidden horror. Priests intoned blessings. Vows were exchanged. Legal scrolls were signed. To the official record, it was an imperial marriage like any other. From that night on, Sporus lived as the Empress of Rome. He rode beside Nero in a golden litter, presided at banquets, and sat in the imperial box at gladiator games. But his luxury was a cage. Every conversation demanded flawless recall of memories he never lived. If his natural voice broke through the trained falsetto, Nero's smile vanished like a light blown out. Servants sometimes found him alone before dawn, motionless, as if unsure who he was when no one required a performance. Rome gossiped endlessly, but no one dared confront the emperor. Pretending became a way of survival for everyone. Yet the empire beyond the palace was cracking. Rebellions flared from Spain to Gaul. Governors muttered that Nero cared more for music competitions than governing. In 68 AD, the Senate branded him an enemy of the state. Even the Praetorian Guard, sworn to protect him, switched sides. As soldiers closed in, Nero fled with a small band of loyalists, and who followed him through the dark countryside. Sporus still dressed as an empress, still called Sabina. They hid in a villa outside Rome, while Nero lurched between fantasies of heroic comeback and dramatic suicide. Ancient writers say he begged Sporus to begin the funeral wails of a widow, to make his death a scene of tragic love. At dawn, hearing hoofbeats of the soldiers who would drag him to public execution, Nero finally chose death. With trembling hands, he pressed a dagger to his own throat, and Sporus helped guide the blade. In a strange way, it was the only act of mercy Nero ever allowed. But the boy's nightmare didn't end with the emperor's last breath. Instead of freedom, he became a political prize. Galba, the next ruler, kept him under guarded courtesing, neither free nor fully captive. After Galba's murder, Otho claimed the throne. Otho had once been married to Poppaea, and, according to rumor, considered marrying Sporus himself, as if to rewrite his own history with the woman both men had loved. Sporus passed from one set of powerful hands to another, a living emblem of Rome's chaos. When Vitellius seized power, Sporus's fragile existence grew even more perilous. The new emperor had little of Nero's theatrical flair or Otho's conflicted fascination. He was coarse, gluttonous, and eager to amuse the mob with brutal spectacles. To Vitellius, Sporus was not a human being, but an exotic, living proof of Rome's decadence. According to chroniclers, he devised a chilling entertainment for the Colosseum. Sporus would be forced to play the role of Persephone, the maiden carried to the underworld. Gladiators dressed as demons would drag him across the arena and violate him before killing him, a performance meant to titillate thousands of roaring spectators. Imagine Sporus hearing those plans whispered through palace corridors. He had survived the scalpel, years of forced performance, and the downfall of one emperor after another. Now he was to become a public sacrifice to spectacle itself. No carefully applied cosmetics, no perfect imitation of Poppaea's gestures, could protect him from this final degradation. He must have understood, with a clarity sharper than any blade, that his life would never again belong to him unless he seized control in the only way left. The night before the show, Sporus acted. Ancient accounts differ on the method. Some say he drank a swift poison. Others that he calmly opened his veins, the Roman method of an honorable death. But all agree on the essential fact. He chose death over further humiliation. He was no more than 20 years old. In the quiet of that final moment, he reclaimed the agency that emperors had tried so hard to erase. Even in death, Sporus's story refused to fade. Roman historians wrote about him as an emblem of Nero's madness, a cautionary tale for future rulers. Yet their words often treated him as an object or symbol, not as a person who once laughed, dreamed, or ran through the echoing marble halls as a carefree boy. We are left to wonder who Sporus might have been if history had allowed him an ordinary life. Perhaps a poet. He had a quick mind and a gift for languages, perhaps a statesman, negotiating peace instead of surviving cruelty. Those possibilities vanished the moment Nero saw Poppaea's eyes in his face. His tragedy reveals something unsettling about society itself. Hundreds of people, physicians, servants, artists, senators, helped maintain Nero's fantasy. Each had reasons: fear, ambition, the instinct to survive. But their compliance built the cage that trapped Sporus. How many told themselves, "I have no choice"? How many of us would have done differently if a tyrant demanded our silence? These questions echo through time, from imperial Rome to any age where power bends reality. Yet within this darkness flickers a small, stubborn light. By choosing his own end, Sporus turned the only page of his life that was truly his to write. That final decision, terrible as it was an act of self-definition. In a world determined to rewrite him, he left a signature none could erase. Today, remembering his name, Sporus is more than recounting a macabre episode. It is a way of restoring dignity to someone whom history tried to reduce to a spectacle. The ruins of Nero's palaces still lie buried beneath later constructions in modern Rome. Tourists stroll above them, unaware that under their feet are the very rooms where a boy once rehearsed a life that wasn't his own. You can almost imagine the faint clink of jewelry being arranged at dawn, the quiet instructions of tutors drilling gestures and phrases, the muffled cries of someone trying to remember who he used to be. Stones do not forget. They carry the echo of every whispered command, every forced smile, every moment of courage and despair. 2,000 years later, Sporus' story still feels uncomfortably close. We like to believe such cruelty belongs to a distant, barbaric past, yet history keeps reminding us that whenever power goes unchecked, people can still be turned into living symbols, forced to play roles designed by someone else. The details changed, different titles, different technologies, but the mechanism is hauntingly familiar. First comes fascination, then control, and finally the rewriting of reality itself until the victim's original identity is barely a rumor. Remembering Sporus is more than a history lesson. It is a quiet act of justice. Behind the imperial marble and the headlines about Nero's extravagance stood a human being whose life was stolen day by day, whose courage showed itself not in open rebellion, but in endurance, and finally, in a choice that no one could take away. When you share this story, when you refuse to let his name vanish into a footnote, you give back a measure of the dignity he was denied. So the next time you hear about absolute power, whether in an empire, a company, or a single relationship, think of the boy who was forced to become an empress. Think of how many watched and stayed silent, and ask yourself what you would have done. Sporus' life ended in tragedy, but the fact that we can still speak his name means that, in a small way, he won. His final act was a quiet declaration that even the most broken life can end on its own terms. That is the truth that still travels across 20 centuries to meet us today. If this story has moved you, help it reach others. Like the video, leave a comment about where you're listening from, and subscribe so more hidden histories can find their way to the light. Sporus was more than a shadow in Nero's drama. He was a person who suffered, endured, and, in the end, chose freedom. Let's make sure his voice, stolen in life, is heard in memory.